In a world where empires rose on glory and buried their sins in silence, this channel opens the doors history tried to erase. Here, we don't tell the stories you learned in school. We uncover the rituals, the betrayals, the forbidden truths carved into palace walls. Every video is a descent into power, fear, and the dark secrets of kings, queens, and forgotten victims. So if you're ready to witness the side of history they tried to erase, subscribe to this channel so we can stay connected. Be sure to like the video and step into the shadows with us, where the real past still breathes. Tonight, we are not walking into a Roman wedding. We are walking into something Rome itself tried to erase. History remembers the music, the saffron veils, the laughter, the contracts signed under torchlight. It remembers the beauty of the ceremony, the dignity of Roman tradition, the proud fathers and jeweled brides stepping into marriage with honor. But what if the real ritual did not begin in daylight? What if, after the guests left, after the doors closed, a second ceremony began, one so disturbing that even ancient writers struggled to describe it? This story is reconstructed from fragments Rome never meant to preserve, legal texts that hint at preparation rites, medical records tied to marriage verification, condemnations from early Christian scholars who spoke of idols so obscene they refused to detail them. And buried beneath it all, a forgotten god brides were forced to face before entering their husband's house. Tonight, you will follow one Roman bride into that hidden chamber. You will see the witnesses Rome required, the ritual Rome called sacred, and the night thousands of women endured in silence. By morning, she will be called a wife. But what happens before dawn is the part history tried to bury forever. The ceremony that was never meant to be seen. Rome celebrated her marriage in daylight, but the real vow would be made in shadows older than the empire itself. The music outside still echoed faintly through the corridors when the heavy wooden door shut behind Flavia. Just moments earlier, she had stood beneath the saffron veil, walnuts scattered at her feet, neighbors cheering as if joy itself had descended upon the household. Rome loved spectacle. It loved order, precision, witnesses, contracts, declarations. Her father had signed the marriage tablet with steady hands. Priests had examined the entrails and declared the omens favorable. Every gesture had followed tradition exactly as the law demanded. To anyone watching, this was a perfect Roman union. But perfection in Rome often hid what it refused to record. Now the laughter was gone. The marble beneath her bare feet felt like ice. Oil lamps flickered along the walls of the atrium, stretching shadows that seemed longer than natural. 7 figures stood waiting in silence. No celebration, no tenderness. Their arrangement was deliberate, almost ceremonial. Flavia's heartbeat pounded louder than their breathing. She suddenly understood why her mother's hands had trembled that morning while adjusting her veil. Those tears had not been sentimental. They had been memory. It was the year 89 AD. Under Emperor Domitian, Rome stood at the height of imperial confidence. Roads stretched across continents. Aqueducts carved through valleys. Laws governed every citizen from Britain to Syria. The Romans believed nothing important should remain undocumented. Contracts defined inheritance. Medical examinations confirmed health. Rituals sanctified transitions. Marriage was not merely a romantic promise. It was a civic duty, a political alliance, an engine for legitimate heirs. The stability of the empire rested on the obedience of households. And obedience began on the wedding night. The pronuba stepped forward first. She was an older matron, chosen precisely because she had been married only once and remained loyal to her husband. Her expression was calm, unreadable, almost practiced. She took Flavia's hands firmly. "This is sacred," she whispered, not cruelly, not kindly, simply as fact. Sacred meant unquestionable. Sacred meant ancient. Sacred meant beyond argument. Rome did not ask whether traditions were comfortable. It asked whether they preserved order. Against the far wall stood a physician, leather bag resting at his feet. His presence did not signal illness. It signaled procedure. Days earlier, he had examined Flavia in her father's home, recording details that would guarantee the legitimacy of the marriage contract. In Rome, virginity was not merely moral. It was economic. A bride's body was tied to inheritance, lineage, and political continuity. The physician was not there for compassion. He was there for verification. A priest murmured archaic Latin, phrases so old their meanings blurred into sound. 3 enslaved women knelt with folded linens and ceramic jars. Their eyes remained lowered, trained to observe everything and speak of nothing. And at the center of the room, beneath a thick linen cloth, stood something no one acknowledged directly. Yet all eyes avoided it carefully, as though its shape carried weight. Flavia glanced toward Marcus, her husband, standing near the doorway. His face betrayed not excitement but tension. He knew, perhaps he had always known. In Rome, sons were taught what daughters were shielded from until the final moment. His silence revealed his powerlessness as much as his complicity. He too was bound by expectation. Masculinity in Rome required performance. Failure would not only shame him, it would stain his lineage. The pronuba released Flavia's hands and approached the covered object. The room tightened with anticipation. Lamps hissed softly. Incense thickened the air. "You must greet Mutunus Tutunus," she said carefully, as though mispronouncing the name might anger forces unseen. The god of conjugal beginnings. The threshold guardian. An old fertility deity from Rome's earliest days, before marble temples, before imperial grandeur, before Rome became an empire that pretended to be civilized. The cloth fell away. The wooden figure beneath was unmistakable, carved with unsettling precision, polished dark from years of touch. It was not decorative. It was deliberate. The craftsmanship was exquisite, anatomical, unapologetic. A sacred phallic idol standing upright, mounted upon a base. To modern eyes, it might seem obscene. To Rome, it was foundational. Ancient writers like Varro mentioned it cautiously. Later Christian critics like Augustine condemned it with visible discomfort. But the evidence remained. Brides were brought before this god as part of preparation. Flavia's breath caught. This was not a symbol hidden in a shrine. This was procedure. The pronuba guided her forward. Without him, no marriage is properly begun. The words carried the weight of centuries. What Flavia felt was not only fear. It was the sudden collapse of illusion. The public ceremony had been beauty. This was infrastructure. Marriage in Rome was not romance. It was statecraft. In that dim atrium, surrounded by witnesses and law, Flavia realized something chilling. Her wedding was never about love. It was about ensuring she entered her husband's house, already shaped by obedience. The god stood silent, but the system behind him was loud. And this was only the beginning. The lamps flickered harder as the pronuba positioned herself behind Flavia. The priest's voice deepened. The physician stepped closer. And Rome prepared to complete a ritual it would one day pretend never existed. A god hidden behind respectability, Rome called him sacred, but spoke his name in whispers. Every bride was told he blessed marriage. None were told how. The wooden idol did not move, yet its presence dominated the atrium like a silent judge. Oil lamps cast trembling reflections across its polished surface, revealing the care with which it had been carved. This was no crude artifact hidden in some rural shrine. It stood inside the house of a respected Roman merchant, positioned at the center of a ritual witnessed by priesthood, medicine, and law. Respectability, Flavia realized, was only a surface Rome wore in daylight. Beneath it lived older gods, darker, more demanding. The pronuba's hands remained firm on her shoulders. Not forceful, not violent, simply unyielding. The kind of grip shaped by generations of repetition. "He is the guardian of beginnings," she said softly. "Without his blessing, no union is complete." Her voice carried the calm certainty of doctrine, not belief, instruction. Flavia searched her memory, recalling fragments of overheard conversations, half-finished warnings, older women lowering their voices when weddings were discussed too closely. The name Mutunus Tutunus had surfaced before, always followed by silence. Rome itself had an uneasy relationship with this god. Early antiquarian writers like Varro referenced him clinically, describing how brides were seated before the deity as part of marital initiation. Later moralists recoiled from the practice, recording it with visible discomfort. By the imperial period, public discussion of the ritual had faded, not because it disappeared, but because it embarrassed Rome's carefully curated image of civility. The empire that engineered aqueducts and codified law still preserved rites rooted in fertility cults older than its founding myths. Flavia felt that contradiction pressing down on her now. Marble walls, legal witnesses, sacred chants. And at the center, a god whose function was unmistakably physical. Religion and control merged seamlessly here. The priest's voice deepened, invoking ancestral spirits to witness the bride's passage from daughter to wife. Incense thickened the air, sweet but suffocating. Ritual always relied on atmosphere, sensory immersion designed to overwhelm resistance. She tried to step back. The Pronuba's grip tightened just enough to halt the movement. "Steady," she murmured. "All brides stand where you stand." That sentence carried more weight than comfort. If all endured it, refusal became unthinkable. Tradition functioned as pressure. No chains were needed when expectation itself held the body in place. Across the atrium, Marcus shifted uneasily. His discomfort was real, but it did nothing to stop the machinery already turning. Roman masculinity required compliance as much as authority. A husband's duty was not to protect his bride from custom, but to ensure custom proceeded uninterrupted. His silence confirmed his role, participant, not rescuer. The enslaved women approached, laying linens at the base of the idol with practiced efficiency. Their expressions remained blank, trained into invisibility. They had witnessed this ritual countless times, absorbing its reality without acknowledgement. Slavery in Rome was not only labor. It was enforced observation without voice. They would remember every detail, yet history would never record their testimony. Flavia's breathing grew shallow as the Pronuba guided her closer. The idol's scale became more oppressive with proximity. Its surface gleamed from years of contact. Countless brides before her, each repeating the same passage. The realization struck with cold clarity. This was not symbolic theater performed occasionally. It was institutional, standardized, preserved through generations as a prerequisite to lawful marriage. "You are presented," the priest intoned. Not introduced, not welcomed. Presented, like an offering, like property transferred between guardianship. Roman marriage law, particularly under Manist traditions, treated wives as entering the legal authority of their husbands' households. Though practices evolved over centuries, the ideological residue remained. The bride's transition was less emotional than juridical, a shift of control ratified through ritual. Flavia felt the weight of that transfer in the room's arrangement. Witnesses ensured procedure. The physician ensured documentation. The priest ensured divine sanction. The Pronuba ensured compliance. Every institution of Rome converged in this moment. Religion, medicine, law, patriarchy fused into a single act disguised as sacred preparation. Her knees weakened, not from physical force, but from the psychological gravity pressing inward. Shame, fear, disbelief, emotions carefully unspoken within Roman society, yet fully engineered by its customs. This ritual was designed not merely to bless marriage, but to reshape the bride's sense of bodily autonomy before the marriage bed was ever reached. The Pronuba leaned close, voice lowering further. "You must show the god you are ready to receive your husband's house." Ready. The word echoed hollowly. Flavia realized readiness was irrelevant. Consent was never the metric. Completion was. Ritual did not measure comfort. It measured obedience. Behind her, the physician opened his leather case, preparing tablets and instruments for documentation. The priest's chant rose. Incense thickened again. The enslaved women stood poised to assist. And as the pronuba began positioning her before the ancient idol, Flavia understood with growing horror that this was only the first phase, the initiation before witnesses. The true wedding night, she sensed, would demand even more. The lamps flickered violently, as if reacting to what Rome had normalized. And the god, polished by centuries of silence, waited without mercy. Law, medicine, and the machinery of obedience, Rome did not rely on faith alone. It recorded, inspected, and verified what it demanded from its brides. The ritual before the wooden god did not end with prayer. It moved with cold precision into documentation. As the priest's chanting faded into a low murmur, the physician stepped forward from the shadows, wax tablet in hand. His expression held no cruelty, only professionalism. That absence of emotion made the moment heavier. This was not chaos. It was administration. In ancient Rome, marriage was not a private promise whispered between two people. It was a contract that determined inheritance, legitimacy, and social stability. Under Roman law, a bride's body carried economic value. Her purity, her ability to bear children, her physical condition, all were matters of civic concern. Legal scholars debated dowries and lineage with the same seriousness given to property boundaries. A wedding night, therefore, could not remain unwitnessed by authority. Flavia stood unsteady as the pronuba adjusted her position, ensuring ritual steps had been completed exactly as tradition required. No deviation, no improvisation. The physician's stylus scratched against wax, marking observations. He had examined her days earlier in her father's home, confirming what the marriage contract promised. Now, after the presentation before Mutunus Tutunus, he compared reality to record. The transformation from daughter to wife was not symbolic. It was procedural. The enslaved women approached with perfumed water, washing her with careful efficiency. The scent of roses filled the atrium, almost tender, almost gentle. That gentleness felt like mockery. Rome understood presentation. It softened harsh acts with fragrance and ceremony, turning domination into tradition. The water trickled down marble and pooled silently at her feet, erasing visible traces while leaving the deeper humiliation untouched. Marcus remained near the doorway, silent witness to a process that bound him as tightly as her. His authority as husband depended upon compliance with ritual. Should any step be skipped, whispers could rise. Questions could be asked about legitimacy. In a society obsessed with lineage, doubt was poison. His masculinity would be judged by performance. Her body would be judged by evidence. The physician's inspection resumed. His movements were clinical, efficient, detached. He asked no unnecessary questions. He offered no reassurance. To him, this was continuity of Roman order. The empire had survived wars, assassinations, and revolts through one principle: control of succession. A lawful heir required a lawful union. A lawful union required proof, and proof required witnesses. Roman writers rarely described this phase in detail. Their language grew evasive, administrative, sterile. Phrases like preliminary rites and preparation of the bride appear in fragments of legal commentary and later Christian condemnations. What they avoided describing speaks louder than what they recorded. Silence in Roman texts often signals discomfort, not absence. Flavia felt her breath fracture into uneven rhythm. Shame pressed inward, but it was not hers alone. It belonged to a system designed to fragment privacy into public verification. She was no longer simply a woman on her wedding night. She was a vessel under inspection, a document being amended. When the physician finally stepped back, he nodded to the pronuba. Phase 1 complete. The stylus carved final notations into wax. The tablet would be stored as proof should dispute ever arise. Rome anticipated conflict in everything, even in marriage. But the machinery did not stop. The pronuba announced the transition to consummation. The marriage bed had already been prepared in the adjoining chamber. It was positioned deliberately, visible from the hallway, illuminated by oil lamps placed to eliminate shadow. Roman custom dictated that witnesses remain nearby to confirm that the act occurred, not to observe every detail, but enough to eliminate doubt. Privacy was a luxury. Rome did not grant brides. Flavia felt dread deepen into something colder, inevitability. The ritual before the god had reshaped her sense of self. Now the law would complete what religion began. She glanced once more at Marcus. His face betrayed anxiety, perhaps even regret, but he did not speak. He could not. The empire's expectations weighed heavier than personal hesitation. As they moved toward the marriage chamber, the enslaved women extinguished several lamps in the atrium, leaving only the idol visible in flickering half-light. Mutunus Tutunus remained standing, silent witness to centuries of repetition. Behind them, the physician closed his leather bag. Ahead, the open doorway of the marriage chamber waited, illuminated, exposed, prepared. And Flavia understood that Rome's true power did not lie in its armies or roads. It lay in rituals so normalized that resistance never learned how to form. The hallway shadows shifted as figures took their positions to observe. The final act was about to begin, and this time there would be no god to blame, only men, law, and tradition. The night of witnesses in Rome, even intimacy belonged to the state. The marriage bed was not a place of love, but a stage of proof. The chamber prepared for consummation did not resemble the private sanctuaries Flavia had imagined since childhood. There were no drawn curtains, no dim seclusion, no gentle concealment offered to the vulnerability of two newly bound lives. Instead, the room was arranged with deliberate exposure. Oil lamps lined the walls, their flames adjusted carefully to remove shadow. The bed itself stood elevated slightly, positioned so the open doorway framed it fully. Nothing here was accidental. Flavia paused at the threshold, her breath shallow beneath the saffron veil still clinging to her hair. The pronuba stood beside her like a sentinel of tradition. "Enter," she instructed softly. Not a request. A continuation of ritual sequence. Every step tonight followed a script older than memory, preserved not through compassion, but through repetition. Marcus entered first, as custom required. His posture was rigid, shoulders tight beneath ceremonial garments. He removed the outer folds of his toga slowly, almost mechanically, aware of the figures gathering beyond the doorway. Marriage in Rome granted authority to the husband, but on this night, he too was measured. His ability to consummate the union would be judged as evidence of virility and legitimacy. Failure would not remain private. It would stain reputation, lineage, and contract. Flavia followed, guided gently but firmly by the pronuba. The enslaved women moved efficiently, arranging linens, adjusting lamps, ensuring nothing obstructed visibility. Their movements were silent, rehearsed. They had prepared countless such chambers, each one identical in function, a theater of compliance. From the hallway came the faint sounds of witnesses positioning themselves, shifting sandals, low murmurs. Throat clears meant to signal presence without intrusion. Roman law did not require explicit observation of the act, but it demanded confirmation. Enough visibility to eliminate doubt. Enough proximity to transform intimacy into documentation. The pronuba remained stationed at the doorway. Her role did not end with preparation. She monitored progression, offering ritual phrases when required, ensuring the act aligned with expectation. In many accounts, she functioned almost as director, guardian of sequence, protector of tradition, enforcer of completion. Flavia sat upon the edge of the bed, body rigid, mind retreating inward. The events in the atrium still echoed through her senses. Incense, carved wood, the physician's cold inspection. What lay ahead did not feel like a beginning. It felt like the final step of surrender already initiated. Marcus approached slowly. His expression revealed conflict, not cruelty, but obligation. He spoke her name once, quietly, perhaps searching for connection amid the suffocating presence beyond the doorway. But words dissolved quickly in the ritual atmosphere. Tenderness had no official place here. The Pronuba's voice cut gently through the silence. A formal blessing, a reminder of duty. The language framed consummation not as affection, but as civic fulfillment, union for heirs, stability for household, strength for Rome itself. Outside, witnesses remained still. Inside, time stretched unnaturally. Marcus moved with visible hesitation, aware that even hesitation might be judged. Masculinity, like obedience, had performance standards. He was not merely a husband tonight. He was an instrument completing the legal transformation of a bride into a wife. Flavia lay still, her thoughts drifting far from the chamber. Dissociation became her refuge. Many Roman writers never recorded the emotional interior of brides, but silence itself suggests the weight of what was endured. The body might comply. The mind sought distance. The act itself passed not with passion, but with procedural gravity. Lamps flickered, linen rustled. The Pronuba spoke brief ritual phrases at intervals, marking progression. There was no cruelty in tone, only structure. That structure made resistance irrelevant. When it ended, Marcus stepped back first, breathing unevenly, relief visible in the tension leaving his shoulders. Duty fulfilled, expectation met. He did not meet Flavia's eyes. Shared humiliation often silences more deeply than conflict. The physician entered soon after. His third inspection was brief, efficient, administrative. Confirmation of consummation. Stylus scratched wax. Marriage legally binding. Rome required closure on all contracts, even those written in flesh rather than ink. One by one, the witnesses withdrew. Sandals faded down the corridor. The Pronuba offered final blessings and stepped away. Lamps were lowered, linens gathered, procedure complete. When dawn's first pale light entered the chamber, Flavia lay alone. Marcus had retreated. Servants had vanished. The physician's records now existed somewhere in the household archives, proof that Rome's requirements had been satisfied. She stared upward at the ceiling, feeling no physical wound, only an internal fracture impossible to document. That was Rome's mastery. Its rituals left no visible scars, only silent compliance passed from mother to daughter through generations of unspoken understanding. And as the morning light strengthened, Flavia realized something colder still. This night, so meticulously enforced, was one Rome itself would one day deny ever existed. The silence passed from mother to daughter. No law commanded their silence. Yet generation after generation, Roman women never spoke of the night that shaped them. Morning in Rome arrived with ordinary sounds. Vendors called from distant streets. Carts rolled over stone. Servants resumed daily routines as though nothing unusual had occurred. The empire moved forward with its usual confidence, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge what had taken place behind closed doors only hours earlier. Flavia rose slowly from the marriage bed. Her body bore no visible mark. That was part of the design. Roman rituals of control were crafted to leave the surface untouched. The law concerned itself with evidence, not emotion. The physician's wax tablet now carried the only official trace of the night, neat lines confirming that the bride had been properly prepared, properly examined, properly consummated. Properly. The word echoed with cold efficiency. Marcus avoided her gaze as he dressed. He had fulfilled his obligation. In Roman society, duty often replaced tenderness. Affection might grow later, perhaps, but affection was never the foundation. Structure was. He stepped toward the doorway without speaking, carrying the quiet relief of a man who had survived inspection. Flavia remained seated, veil loosened in her hands. Her thoughts drifted not toward her husband, but toward her mother. She remembered the trembling fingers adjusting her braids before the ceremony, the forced smile, the tears disguised as joy. At the time, Flavia had believed they were tears of loss, a mother surrendering her daughter to a new household. Now she understood they were something else entirely. Memory. Roman matrons rarely described the wedding night openly. Conversations about marriage focused on duties, dowries, and heirs. The deeper rituals existed in fragments, warnings cut short, phrases abandoned mid-sentence, glances exchanged between older women when brides were near. Silence became inheritance. Why did they not speak? The answer lay in Rome's structure. To question the ritual was to question the system that sustained family legitimacy. A woman's security depended on marriage. Her status, protection, and survival flowed through the household she entered. Challenging the ritual would not dismantle it. It would isolate her within it. Silence was not approval. It was adaptation. Across the empire, thousands of brides underwent similar rites. The public ceremony glittered in daylight, saffron veil, ritual knots, laughter, offerings to household gods. Yet beneath the beauty operated a machinery of verification few dared name aloud. Ancient authors mentioned the practice cautiously. Varro referenced seating brides before Mutunus Tutunus. Christian critics later condemned it in disgust, but even their outrage remained vague, as though language itself resisted full exposure. Silence preserved Rome's dignity. In the weeks that followed, Flavia performed her new role as wife with precision. She learned the rhythms of her husband's household, supervised servants, managed stores of grain and oil. Outwardly, nothing appeared fractured. Rome valued composure. Emotional endurance was praised as virtue. A model wife, inscriptions would later call her. Yet something had shifted inside her, a quiet awareness that her body had become part of a civic equation, that her consent had never been the determining factor. She had been shaped by a ritual disguised as blessing, transforming her observation into compliance. Years later, when a young cousin asked about marriage with nervous curiosity, Flavia paused before answering. The question lingered in the air between them. She saw in the girl's eyes the same innocence she once carried. For a moment, she considered speaking, describing the atrium, the idol, the witnesses. Instead, she adjusted the girl's veil and offered safe advice about duty and patience. The silence continued. Rome thrived on such continuity. Traditions survived not because they were kind, but because they were normalized. The empire recorded its victories in stone and bronze. It archived laws, decrees, and triumphs. But it rarely documented the private cost of maintaining order. Generations passed. Emperors rose and fell. Civil wars fractured unity. New philosophies spread through the provinces. Christianity began reshaping moral language, introducing ideas of privacy and sanctity foreign to earlier rites. Gradually, the ritual before Mutunus Tutunus faded from practice. Statues were removed, idols buried, legal inspections condemned as indecent. Rome rewrote its memory. By the time chroniclers attempted to reconstruct earlier customs, details had dissolved into ambiguity. References remained, scattered, uncomfortable, incomplete. Enough to suggest truth, not enough to fully expose it. Flavia would live decades longer, her gravestone one day praising her as faithful, modest, devoted. Nothing on that stone would mention the atrium or the witnesses. Nothing would record the silent fracture of her first night. And perhaps that was Rome's most enduring strategy. A ritual can vanish from law. An idol can be buried. But silence leaves no ruins to excavate. The ritual Rome tried to bury forever empires record their glory, but they erased their shame. And some rituals survive only as fragments historians were never meant to assemble. Long after Flavia's lifetime faded into dust, Rome itself began to change in ways its founders could never have imagined. The empire that once worshipped fertility gods and ancestral spirits slowly bent beneath the weight of new belief systems. Christianity, once persecuted, rose steadily through imperial ranks. With it came new ideas: privacy of the body, sanctity of marriage, moral condemnation of pagan rites. And with those ideas came discomfort. Church fathers studying older Roman customs encountered references that disturbed them deeply. Writers like St. Augustine and Arnabas alluded to ancient bridal preparations with visible unease. Their descriptions were indirect, restrained, almost reluctant, as though recording the full reality would stain the moral authority they were trying to establish. They condemned what they called obscene idols and shameful seating rituals, but rarely detailed procedure. Silence began its work again, this time enforced by moral reform rather than social obedience. Statues of Mutunus Tutunus disappeared from domestic shrines. Some were destroyed outright. Others were buried quietly, hidden beneath temple foundations or discarded beyond city boundaries. Priests who once oversaw such rites either abandoned them or reinterpreted them into symbolic gestures stripped of physical enactment. Law followed belief. Medical inspections tied to marital verification were gradually condemned as indecent intrusions. The open witnessing of consummation, once justified by lineage anxiety, fell out of practice as privacy became moral virtue rather than suspicious concealment. Rome's marriage rituals softened in public memory, recast into dignified ceremonies, emphasizing union rather than inspection. History was being edited in real time. By the late imperial period, few openly acknowledged the earlier rites. Legal texts referenced preliminary customs without elaboration. Christian sermons denounced unnamed pagan obscenities without preserving detail. What had once been standardized procedure dissolved into whispers and fragments, difficult to reconstruct, easy to deny. Yet archaeology and manuscript study would one day reopen what Rome tried to seal. Scattered references survived in antiquarian works, marginal notes, and moral condemnations. Varro's clinical observations, Lactantius' disgusted commentaries, Arnobius' evasive descriptions. Individually, each fragment seemed vague. Together, they formed a pattern impossible to ignore. Modern historians, confronting these sources, debated their meaning. Some argued the rituals were symbolic, ceremonial gestures exaggerated by critics. Others pointed to consistency across independent accounts, preparation rites, fertility idols, witness transitions, suggesting procedural reality rather than metaphor. The truth lay buried, not because evidence was absent, but because it was uncomfortable. Empires prefer narratives of engineering, law, and military discipline. They celebrate aqueducts, roads, and senatorial governance. They do not easily preserve rituals that expose how deeply control penetrated private life. The Roman wedding, polished in textbooks as dignified and orderly, concealed a machinery designed to ensure obedience before intimacy even began. Flavia's experience, though her name never appeared in surviving records, was repeated across generations. Thousands of brides passed through atriums like hers. Thousands stood before idols now lost to soil. Their voices never entered official history, leaving scholars to reconstruct emotional reality from administrative language. That absence itself speaks volumes. Because when a civilization documents everything except the suffering of its most controlled members, silence becomes evidence. Today, museums display Roman wedding jewelry, saffron veils, carved marriage tablets. Visitors admire craftsmanship, ritual beauty, cultural sophistication. Few exhibits mention Mutunus Tutunus. Fewer still describe the preparation rites tied to him. The darker layers remain academic, debated in journals rather than displayed in halls. Rome succeeded, in part, in burying its ritual. But fragments endure. In manuscripts written with hesitation, in condemnations phrased with discomfort, in idols unearthed where no shrine should have required them, and in the reconstructed understanding that beneath Rome's marble dignity lived customs built not only on order, but on submission. As historians piece together these remnants, one reflection remains unavoidable. Civilizations are not defined solely by what they build, but by what they feel compelled to erase.